Alright, so by popular request, I'm going to make this lecture presentation video about Madeleine R. Hannah's 2019 article, actually. So this is pretty recently published. It was actually published in December. It's called A Changing Understanding of Writing. This article is great. This semester is the second semester I've taught it, and I guess I've been pretty much teaching it since it was published. To be honest, I can't even recall how I found it. I think it was, a suggested article that was like related to one I was reading at the time in preparation for the course I was soon to teach. It's kind of like, like a YouTube video recommendation, I guess. But in the world of academia instead. Before we jump into the article, just to refresh your memory, I want to read the abstract to get the general course and scope of the article back on stage, I guess. Alright, so here's the abstract. As student writers gain more instruction and experience, their beliefs about writing and their own writing practices change. Based on prior research about writing development and the author's own experiences, a developmental scale was created that can be used to chart the typical course of a writer's growth and understanding of writing. It is not strictly linear, and stages might be skipped, condensed, or combined. Like the writing process itself, the scale is recursive. Ideally, the writer would get into a cycle of repeating the final two stages, building on former knowledge and always seeking new understandings that can be applied to both learning and teaching writing. Yeah, so if you went to the slide recently, I've kind of edited it and added a lot of extra questions at the front for you to think about as you're reading it or rereading it and, studying it. I put all of these questions here not to front load your studying the article or overwhelm you with the possibilities of questions that you can ask about a piece of writing, this piece in particular, but to just give you an idea of, the kinds of things that you might want to think about. Not all of them, but, take what speaks to you most, and think about those things as you're studying the article and getting ready to either imitate or emulate some part of its form or fashioning in your own piece of writing. You were probably reading this as part of the sequence of readings that I've designed for this course to prepare you to write your literacy narrative. Kind of sidebarring and continuing that tangent. This article is really interesting because it combines the best of, well, maybe not the best of both worlds, but it combines two different essential components of two very different ways of writing, which are the personal essay and the academic essay, or the informal and the formal, or maybe the non-researched and the researched. But it's really cool because not only is it accessible and introduces a lot of sometimes fairly complicated scholarship into the discussion, it also uses research in a way to communicate with personal experience and make that personal experience. See, I think students often see writing as either going toward a research paper or going away from that, where they can write about themselves and use, personal pronouns. I can't tell you how many times I've had the question asked to me from freshman students, can I use I in my paper? Yes, of course you can use I. I mean, not only can you probably should. So for starters with these questions, ask yourself, that basic question, or maybe not basic, but essential question that your teachers always ask you to try and figure out when you're studying a piece of writing. What is Hannah's thesis in this essay? Does she have a thesis? You can ask that too. Can you identify her writing goals and her hopes of what she can offer her readers? just to give you a heads up, she does have a thesis. You can identify her writing goals, and she pretty clearly outlines her hopes of what this essay might accomplish. Continuing that line of questions, does Hannah have a clear understanding of her audiences and who are her audiences? Yeah, totally, she does. She knows exactly who she's writing to. She's writing teachers and students in writing courses or who have to, make their way through academic essay assignments. The status of the student and the status of the teacher, they're often not equated, but one given precedence over the other, or at least looked at as two different levels, with the status of the teacher being higher than the student. In this case, she's offering her writerly development scale as an opportunity to both of these audiences, for both of them to grow by locating themselves along its sequence and figuring out how to get into that latter cycle of recursion with the final two stages, as opposed to the former, where you're stuck and either don't know what's going on or can't really express that irksome feeling that you have. What effect or effects does reading her article have on you? Do you relate to it? Can you, can you vibe with what she's talking about and maybe see some of your own experiences in the way she's relating hers? What effect or effects do you think it might have on readers aside from yourself? Another question you could ask in place of that second one is, do you think a lot of people would be able to relate to this article, judging from your own experiences you've seen your friends, your peers, and just other people have, and maybe even extend from there and consider the kind of use value that something like this could have if not only you but a lot of other people can relate to it and benefit from it. That's a valuable piece of writing. All right, so here we go with the more specific lines of questions. In what ways does she incorporate outside research into her article? What is all this extra research doing there? There's a lot of in-text citations covering many different publications of composition scholars, many well-known names in the field of composition, and articles to match that have had profound and major influence. If you look in the references page, there's, on just a rough glance, maybe 15, 16 or so sources. That's a good amount of sources. Maybe it doesn't seem like a lot if you're not having to write this, but handling that many references in the space of a 5-page article is quite the challenge, and she takes it up well and accomplishes it. So, think about, how she's incorporating these resources and structuring them into her piece to set her self up for creating a more powerful effect on her audience, and also to serve as a when you use the word credible, it kind of comes with some strange connotations, but she's using these outside sources to set her own experience up in a more credible, or at least researched light, to reference her own experiences in light of scholarship is a clever way of not only understanding her experiences better, but creating a scale that's, or the writerly development scale that's quite relatable by a number of students and teachers alike. And what about the way it's structured? A structure, I think, is an accessible point of entry when trying to develop your writing process. With the structure, are there sections? Yeah, obviously, even if you didn't read it, you can look at it and just see that there are, bold headers scattered throughout the piece, which, of course, indicate different sections. Do the sections serve a purpose? Yeah, definitely they do. They delineate the steps and stages, or phases, as she sometimes calls it, of the writerly development scale. So if you're going back to this, you can locate where you need to read instead of having to skim through to get to the start of one of the points, or one of the stages. Are they useful? Do they provide a sense of organization? Do they make it more navigable? All kind of variations of the same question, but maybe you can answer each with a bit of nuance. All right, so getting into the first section, what do we know about writing? I'm just going to leave this on the screen and kind of trace our way to where this comes into play in the actual article. Essentially, she begins this article by tracing some specific window of her literacy development, right? So really, she opens it and introduces this in the form of a literacy narrative. Indeed, that's exactly what she's trying to find more out about, or find out more about. She says, near the end of my time as an undergraduate student, I was stunned to find out that although I had always loved to write and excelled in my English classes, I knew no strategies for addressing writing. I was taking a class on style and genre at the time, and I realized that even the most basic, common-sense understanding of the writing process had so far eluded me. She says, how could this be? You can almost feel like that was the original seed of thought. It seemed impossible that I had made it so far without acquiring any practical strategies for generating ideas, any appreciation for the importance of format and genre, any understanding of how writing can be taught. And yet, there I was, about to graduate college without being able to articulate how or why I wrote the way I did. It became clear that I was not the only one who had been left in the dark. Everyone in my class, it seemed, was having the same revelations. Outside of class, the situation was much the same. Friends I talked to, including English writing majors and future teachers, confessed feeling similarly confused and unprepared for the demands of the writing tasks before them. Basic strategies for drafting and revising were world-shaking epiphanies to them. You gotta, how the heck did... The more people I talked to, the more I realized I was not alone. So look at this sentence right here. The more people I talked to, the more I realized I was not alone. My first few reads through this article, I think I just kind of skipped past this sentence. But what's happening here is her informing us that she had conversations about this with a lot of folks. And she was compelled to talk more and more about this, to find out the stories of more and more people, to see where her own experiences stood in relation to a collection of others. And I guess in some ways that actually symbolizes what she's doing with incorporating so much scholarship. She's setting her own experiences in relation to this sequencing of academic scholarship concerning the field of composition from the mid-20th century onward. So the more people I talked to, the more I realized I was not alone. You can almost read that as the more sources I studied and the more scholars whose articles I read and tried to understand, the more I realized I was not alone. Or the more I realized I really didn't know as much as I thought I did. As a future educator, I was naturally drawn to the pedagogical implications of all this. Implications, indeed. It became apparent that many of my own teachers had unknowingly failed me because they themselves had never been given access to the knowledge and strategies I was learning. Well, there's a sentence that's going to create interest, right? To keep reading. I know at that point I was like, okay, tell me more. I got to know more about this. After all, you can't teach what you don't know. I was thrilled to be learning ways to improve my own writing habits, but I was even more interested in finding out how writing can and should be taught. As I contemplated my own development, I considered how I would go about leading others through the same steps of growth. My hope is that by exploring my own journey as an emerging writer, and here's her hope, that's one of the words in those first questions, I can offer some insight for student writers into their own developmental process. Further, I hope that teachers of writing can use my experience to better understand the experiences of their students. Ideally, teachers and writers alike will come away from this paper with a better understanding of the writing process, as well as practical applications that they can use to engage in and instruct writing. So yeah, what do we know about writing? Well, maybe not as much as we thought we did, right? So here is a very appropriate place to start introducing the history of composition scholarship to lead us to, a more fulfilled, complete present moment of understanding the scope of this subject that we somehow made our way through, but didn't really understand the underpinnings of. So yeah, of course it's appropriate to trace that course through referential scholarship, right? It's a good structuring method. All right, so what is writing? This is a deceptively easy question. Well, it seems easy, but it's actually quite difficult to answer. It's almost like a trick question to say, what is writing? Well, it's a million things, and it's a million and one more things, Aside from all the various personal and generalizable particularities of what writing is and what it does and how it's changed over time, all of that goes back to writing as a thing that happens through time. It's a process. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Sometimes, these things go out of order, they overlap, they skip and blend and combine and communicate in unexpected, sometimes crazy, wild, but, hopefully interesting ways. So writing is a process. It's a recursive and generative process. When something recurs, it means it repeats. And through repetition, it can become established. Maybe think about the word generative before recursive. You're generating content or generating the end result of channeling something through language that exists from one place but now on the page or on the digital document. And then once that's there, you can do stuff with it. You can shape it and mold it and use it for different purposes and be creative, etc., etc. And in that way, the generation of content and the ability to handle it outside of a linear flow of time, those two work together. And that, I think, in essence, is the process. In a nutshell, in a very general nutshell, that's what's happening with writing.